Good morning. How are you? We have got a lot to cover today, so please make sure that you have a pen and paper if you need it, and your novel, because we will be close reading together some of the texts. This is the end of the novel, so we've got some really important things to discuss. The first thing that I wanted to do is I copied and pasted this and printed it out so I could read it to you. This is from administration. And it's a reminder to you because we're having some issues. I'm having some issues getting you to turn your work in. So in period 4, I only got 7 students turning in their assignment from last week. 7. In period 6, I had 12 students turn in their work. And in period 8, I had 10 students turn in their work. Now the difficulty for me is if you wait till the last minute to be turning in your work, I'm putting the new work in on Tuesday. So while I'm trying to work on Sunday and Monday and Tuesday morning getting ready for Tuesday's lesson, and you're turning your work in on Monday and Tuesday, that puts me into overload. But I'd rather have that than not have you turn in your homework. I emailed all of the students who didn't turn in their work from last week. And let me read this to you, and then I'll tell you the last part that you need to know. It says, remote education is not optional. It is mandatory and has been directed by both the governor and the state education department. Moreover, student attendance and work completion during this remote instruction period is critical in ensuring that students develop the skills necessary for success in subsequent education. Not attending or not completing work will have negative natural consequences as students navigate future education. Teachers are keeping records of student participation, effort, and engagement, and these will be used to track attendance. In order for a student to receive daily attendance credit, they must have completed an assignment, shared their work, emailed a response, or have had a parent or guardian email a confirmation or response. Credit for this participation will automatically yield attendance credit for that day. So, needless to say, if only 7 students in period 4 did their homework, then only 7 students were present for Tuesday's class, and everyone else was marked absent. If you did attend the Zoom meeting last week for period 4, you did get credit for attendance, and some of you did that. It was a great meeting. We had 12 students participate. This week I'll be doing period 8 Zoom meeting on Thursday at 1 o'clock, I believe. Yes. So the other thing that I wanted to say about this is that I have to communicate with you 3 times during the course of a week if I don't hear from you. So I emailed today. I'll email tomorrow if I still don't get your homework. I'll phone call or email the next day. And then if I still don't get your assignment from last week, I send your name forward to administration, and they compile a list and touch base with you or your guardian. So it really is a lot of work and a lot of steps to go through in order to get a hold of you. So really the best thing to do is to just tune in on Tuesday, which is English Day, watch the instructional video, and then go ahead and complete that assignment on Tuesday. They're super easy assignments. So that's my lecture. Please get your work in. It makes it easier for me, makes it easier for you. That way I don't have to bother administration, I don't have to bother your parents or guardians, okay? So with that said, we will do our daily discovery, which is illusion number 5. And so far the illusions that we've done are Blind Leading the Blind, The Good Samaritan, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Pandora's Box we did last week. A reminder of what an illusion is in case this is your first instructional video from me. An illusion is basically a reference to something else. It's when a writer mentions some other work or refers to an earlier part of a current work. In literature, it's frequently used to reference cultural works. You can allude to the Bible story, to Greek mythology, to other literature. Illusions also exist in other forms. Musicians, for example, frequently allude to melodies used by other musicians. The verb form of illusion is to allude. So alluding to something is the same thing as making an allusion to. And here's an example. You're acting like such a Scrooge. That is alluding to Charles Dickens' novel, A Christmas Carol. This line means that the person is being miserly and selfish. Miserly means tight with money, just like the character Scrooge from the story. Okay, so today's illusion is called Achilles' heel. And you may have heard this before, but this is in a nutshell where it is coming from. According to Greek mythology, when Achilles was a baby, his mother dipped him in the river Styx because the water from the river gave immortality to humans. His mother held him by the heel and dipped him in the water, so that the only place on his body not touched by the water was that place where she held him on the heel. From then on, Achilles' heel was his one area of vulnerability or weakness. Eventually, the great warrior Achilles was killed during the Trojan War when a poisoned arrow struck his heel. Talk about irony. So today, the term has come to refer to a person's area of particular weakness or vulnerability. And I have two examples for you. Maria's inability to resist rich desserts was her Achilles' heel, keeping her from losing the 10 pounds she really wanted to lose. And the next example, Senator Fitzgerald's desire to be liked by everyone was his Achilles' heel, preventing him from taking a strong stand on any issue and leading to his eventual defeat in the elections. Poor Senator Fitzgerald. So that is illusion number 5. That's our daily discovery. So now we're going to talk about the novel. So please grab your novel. There's quite a bit of reading that we are going to do from the novel because this is the end and I really want to make sure to tie up loose ends. If we were in the classroom, we would have been reading this together throughout the week and touched base with all of the important points. So chapter 11 is called Castle Rock. And remember previously, the boys had gotten in a fight in the middle of the night in the shelter. And it was Jack and his tribe coming to get fire. And they couldn't get fire, so they stole Piggy's glasses. So this is the next morning. The next morning, Ralph and his few companions try to light the fire in the cold air, but the attempt is hopeless without Piggy's glasses. Piggy is barely able to see. He suggests that Ralph hold a meeting to discuss their options. So he's still clinging on, sweet Piggy, to the concept of civilization and community in the conch shell. Ralph blows the conch shell, and the boys who have not gone to join Jack's tribe assemble on the beach. They decide that their only choice is to travel to Castle Rock to make Jack and his followers see reason. And the first thing that I want to look at is on page 173. Just a brief little snippet. It's a picture that is painted that portrays the friendship between Ralph and Piggy so differently than it was portrayed at the beginning of the novel, and I really like this scene. So on page 173, you'll see a line break a little more than halfway, and they're on their way to Jack's tribe, okay? They set off along the beach in formation. Ralph went first, limping a little, his spear carried over one shoulder. He saw things partially through the tremble of the heat haze over the flashing sands and his own long hair and injuries. Remember, he got his eye busted up and his hair's in his way, and he's limping because of the fight in the hut. Behind him came the twins, worried now for a while, but full of unquenchable vitality. They said little, but they trailed the butts of their wooden spears, for Piggy had found that by looking down and shielding his tired sight from the sun, he could just see these moving along the sand. he walked between the trailing butts of the spears. Therefore, the conch held carefully between his two hands. I just wanted to point that out because it was just such a sweet, kind gesture for the boys to trail their spears in the sand so Piggy could have something to follow. And for those of us who wear corrective lenses, and we can imagine how Piggy must feel without his sight. And he's been the character that sees clearly throughout this novel, and so now his eyes are blurry. So I wanted to take a look at that. So further on in chapter 11, Ralph decides to take the conch shell to Castle Rock, hoping that it will remind Jack's followers of his authority. Once at Jack's camp, however, Ralph's group encounters armed guards. Ralph blows the conch shell, but the guards tell them to leave and throw stones at them, aiming to miss. Suddenly, Jack and a group of hunters emerge from the forest, dragging a dead pig. Jack and Ralph immediately face off. Jack commands Ralph to leave his camp, and Ralph demands that Jack return Piggy's glasses. Jack attacks Ralph, and they fight. Ralph struggles to make Jack understand the importance of the signal fire to any hope the boys might ever have of being rescued. But Jack orders his hunters to capture Sam and Eric and tie them up. This sends Ralph into a fury, and he lunges at Jack. Ralph and Jack fight for a second time in chapter 11, and Piggy cries out, struggling to make himself heard over the fight. As Piggy tries to speak, hoping to remind the group of the importance of rules and rescue, Roger shoves a massive boulder down the mountainside. Ralph, who hears the rock falling, he dives and dodges it. But the boulder strikes Piggy. It shatters the conch shell he's holding and knocks him off the mountainside to his death on the rocks below. Jack throws his spear at Ralph, and the other boys quickly join in. Ralph escapes into the jungle, and Roger and Jack begin to torture Sam and Eric, forcing them to submit to Jack's authority and join his tribe. And we're going to take a look on page 179 at the death of Piggy, which is very sad. Even though Piggy could be an annoying character, he had a kind heart and he was a good friend to Ralph. So on 179, 3/4 of the way down, Piggy's voice penetrated to Ralph. "Let me speak." He was standing in the dust of the fight, and the tribe saw his intention. The shrill cheer changed to a steady booing. Piggy held up the conch, and the booing sagged a little, and then came up again to strength. "I got the conch," he shouted. "I tell you, I got the conch." Surprisingly, there was silence now. The tribe were curious to hear what amusing things he might have to say. Silence and pause, but in the silence a curious air noise close by Ralph's head. He gave it half his attention, and there it was again, a faint zup. Someone was throwing stones. Roger was dropping them, his one hand still on the lever. Below him, Ralph was a shock of hair and Piggy a bag of fat. So that's a reference to how high up Roger is. And just so you know, he's got a lever, which is probably a stick of some sort, underneath a boulder. And he's using the lever to lodge the boulder. And that's what rolls down and eventually kills Piggy. "I got this to say. You're acting like a crowd of kids." Poor Piggy. They are a crowd of kids. The booing rose and died again as Piggy lifted the white magic shell. "Which is better, to be a pack of painted Indians like you are, to be sensible like Ralph is?" A great clamor rose again among the savages, and Piggy shouted again, "Which is better, to have rules and agree, or to hunt and kill?" Again the clamor, and again zup. Ralph shouted against the noise, "Which is better, law and rescue, or hunting and breaking things up?" Now Jack was yelling too, and Ralph could no longer make himself heard. Jack had backed right against the tribe, and they were a solid mass of menace that bristled with spears. The intention of a charge was forming among them, so they're going to charge at Piggy and Ralph and attack them. They were working up to it, and the neck would be swept clear. Roger stood facing them, a little to one side, Ralph stood facing them, a little to one side, his spear ready. By him stood Piggy, still holding out the talisman, the fragile, shining beauty of the shell. The storm of sound beat at them, an incantation of hatred. High overhead, Roger, with a sense of delirious abandonment, leaned all of his weight on the lever. Ralph heard the great rock before he saw it. He was aware of a jolt in the earth that came to him through the soles of his feet and the breaking sound of stones at the top of the cliff. Then the monstrous red thing bounded across the neck, and he flung himself flat while the tribe shrieked. The rock struck Piggy a glancing blow from chin to knee. The conch exploded into 1,000 white fragments and ceased to exist. And as a symbol goes, we know that the conch symbolizes civilization and community, and so it's been shattered. Piggy says nothing, with no time for even a grunt, traveled through the air sideways from the rock, turning over as he went. The rock bounded twice and was lost in the forest. Piggy fell 40 feet, landed on his back across the square red rock in the sea. His head opened, and stuff came out and turned red. Piggy's arms and legs twitched a bit, like a pig's after it had been killed. Then the sea breathed again in a low, slow sigh. The water boiled white and pink over the rock, and when it went, sucking back again, the body of Piggy was gone. How very sad for Piggy. And that was purposeful on Roger's part. So chapter 12 is the last chapter of the novel. It's called The Cry of the Hunters, and this has got a lot of action in it and a lot of important information, so we need to discuss that. So after Piggy's death, Ralph runs away and he hides in the jungle. And as he's hiding, he's thinking about the chaos that he just can't believe is happening. And he thinks about the deaths of Simon and Piggy, and he realizes that all of civilization has been stripped from the island. As he's running away, he stumbles across the sow's head, the Lord of the Flies. It's now merely a white skull, and he notes that it was as white as the conch shell, and he knocks the skull to the ground. And he takes the stake it was impaled on to use as a weapon against Jack. Later that night, Ralph sneaks down to the camp at the Castle Rock, and he finds Sam and Eric guarding the entrance. And he's happy about that because he knows that they're his allies. The twins give him food, but they refuse to join him. They tell him that Jack plans to send the entire tribe after him the next day. Ralph hides in a thicket and falls asleep. In the morning, he hears Jack talking and torturing one of the twins to find out where Ralph is hiding. Several boys try to break into the thicket by rolling a boulder, but the thicket is too dense. A group of boys tries to fight their way into the thicket, but Ralph fends them off with his spear. Then Ralph smells smoke and realizes that Jack has set the jungle on fire in order to smoke him out. Ralph abandons his hiding place and fights his way past Jack and a group of hunters. Chased by a group of body-painted warrior boys wielding sharp wooden spears, Ralph plunges frantically through the undergrowth looking for a place to hide. At last he ends up on the beach where he collapses in exhaustion, his pursuers right behind him. Suddenly, Ralph looks up to see a naval officer standing over him. The officer tells the boy that his ship had come to the island after seeing the blazing fire in the jungle. How ironic is that? This whole time, Ralph has wanted a fire to get rescued, and now they've got a fire, and here they are, getting rescued. Jack's hunters reach the beach and stop in their tracks upon seeing the officer. The officer matter-of-factly assumes the boys are up to, as he puts it, fun and games. When he learns what has happened on the island, the officer is reproachful. How could this group of boys, these English boys, have lost rules of civilization in so short of a time? For his part, Ralph is overwhelmed by the knowledge that he's been rescued, and that he will finally escape the island after coming so close to a violent death. He begins to sob, and so do the other boys, and the naval officer turns his back so that they may gain their composure. And we are going to close read the end, starting on page 199. I hope you noticed in that chapter 2 the personification of fire again. So in 199, 3/4 of the way down that big paragraph, Ralph screamed. A scream of fright and anger and desperation. Excuse me. His legs straightened. The screams became continuous and foaming. He shot forward. He burst the thicket, was in the open. That's my cat. Sorry. He shot forward, burst the thicket, was in the open, screaming, snarling, bloody. He swung the stake, and the savage tumbled over. But there were others coming toward him, crying out. He swerved as a spear flew past, and then was silent, running. All at once, the lights flickering ahead of him merged together. The roar of the forest rose to thunder, and a tall bush directly in his path burst into a great fan-shaped flame. He swung to the right, running desperately fast, with the heat beating on his left side and the fire racing forward like the tide. The ululation rose behind him and spread along, a series of sharp, short cries, the sighting call. A ululation we would have talked about in class is actually the sound you make when you vibrate your throat, kind of like woo, 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 woo. So that's what the tribe is doing, is they're making that sound whenever they spot Ralph, and so they know where he is at all times. A brown figure showed at his right and fell away. They were all running, all crying out madly. He could hear them crashing in the undergrowth, and on the left was the hot, bright thunder of the fire. He forgot his wounds and his hunger and his thirst, and he became fear, hopeless fear on flying feet, rushing through the forest toward the open beach. Spots jumped before his eyes and turned into red circles that expanded quickly until they passed out of sight. Below him, someone's legs were getting tired, and the desperate ululation advanced like a jagged fringe of menace and was almost overhead. He stumbled over a root, and the cry that pursued him rose even higher. He saw a shelter burst into flames, and the fire flapped at his right shoulder, and there was the glitter of water. Then he was down, rolling over and over in the warm sand, crouching with his arm to ward off, trying to cry for mercy. He staggered to his feet, tensed for more terrors, and looked up at a huge peaked cap. It was a white-topped cap, and above the green shade of the peak was a crown, an anchor, gold foliage. He saw white drill, epaulettes, a revolver, a row of gilt buttons down the front of a uniform. A naval officer stood on the stand, looking down at Ralph in wary astonishment. On the beach behind him was a cutter, that's a ship. Her bows hauled up and head by 2 ratings. In the stern sheets, another rating held a submachine gun. Another irony. Here they're at war on the island, and they're being rescued by a warship. The ululation faltered and died away. The officer looked at Ralph doubtfully for a moment, then took his hand away from the butt of the revolver. "Hello?" Squirming a little, conscious of his filthy appearance, Ralph answered shyly, "Hello?" The officer nodded, as if a question had been answered. "Are there any adults, any grown-ups with you?" Dumbly, Ralph shook his head. He turned a half pace on the sand. A semicircle of little boys, their bodies streaked with colored clay, sharp sticks in their hands, were standing on the beach making no noise at all. Notice how William Golding calls them little boys, because that's what the naval officer sees when he looks at them. But as readers, and Ralph, we see them as savages. The fire reached the coconut palms by the beach and swallowed them noisily. A flame, seemingly detached, swung like an acrobat and licked up the palm heads on the platform. The sky was black. The officer grinned cheerfully at Ralph. "We saw your smoke. What have you been doing? Having a war or something?" Ralph nodded. The officer inspected the little scarecrow in front of him. The kid needed a bath, a haircut, a nose wipe, and a good deal of ointment. "Nobody killed, I hope. Any dead bodies?" "Only 2, and they've gone." The officer leaned down and looked closely at Ralph. 2? Killed? Ralph nodded again. Behind him, the whole island was shuddering with flame. The officer knew as a rule when people were telling the truth. He whistled softly. Other boys were appearing now, tiny tots, some of them brown, with the distended bellies of small savages. One of them came close to the officer and looked up. I'm... But there's no more to come. Percival Wimms Madison sought in his head for an incantation that had faded clean away. So Percival, when he came to the island, knew his name, and now he's forgotten his own name. The officer turned back to Ralph. "We'll take you off. How many of you are there?" Ralph shook his head. The officer looked past him to the group of painted boys. "Who's boss here?" "I am," said Ralph loudly. A little boy, who wore the remains of an extraordinary black cap on his red hair, and who carried the remains of a pair of spectacles at his waist, started forward, then changed his mind and stood still. So Jack was going to step forward and say that he was the boss, but he steps back because he realizes he's not. "We saw your smoke, and you don't know how many of you there are?" "No, sir." "I should have thought," said the officer as he visualized the search before him, "I should have thought that a pack of British boys, you're all British, aren't you, would have been able to put up a better show than that. I mean..." "It was like that at first," said Ralph, before he stopped. "We were together then." The officer nodded helpfully. Ralph looked at him dumbly. For a moment he had a fleeting picture of a strange glamour that had once invested the beaches. But the island was scorched up like dead wood. Simon was dead, and Jack had... The tears began to flow, and sobs shook him. He gave himself up to them now for the first time on the island, great, shuddering spasms of grief that seemed to wrench his whole body. His voice rose under the black smoke before the burning wreckage of the island, and infected by that emotion, the other little boys began to shake and sob too. And the middle of them, with filthy body, matted hair, and unwiped nose, Ralph wept for the end of innocence, the darkness of man's heart, and the fall through the air of the true, wise friend called Piggy. And that, my friends, is that. So a really intense novel, sad, speculative, a lot to think about, and I hope that you've done some thinking. So now we need to talk about the choice exploration assignment that you have, and also the independent practice that you have. The choice exploration this week is typically I give you 3 assignments to choose from. Since this is the end of the novel, and if we were in class, you would have had some sort of testing situation, I'm giving you a raft assignment. We did one for Raisin in the Sun. Remember, raft stands for role, audience, format, and topic. And you get to choose any of the roles, the audience, the format, and the topic to create your own project. So I printed it out. You don't need to, but you can if you want to. And I'll tell you that For the roles, you can be any of the characters in the novel. You can be the idea of the beast, the Lord of the Flies. Your audience can be me, Ralph's dad or Piggy's aunt, William Golding, or any of the characters in the novel. Your format, and I'm going to read through these because you have quite a bit of choice. You can choose to illustrate a scene from your reading through a collage, a comic, or a drawing. You must use color. Illustration must be age appropriate. That means that if you're going to do a drawing, you're going to do a drawing well. Please don't turn in the work that maybe a 3rd or 4th grader could do. I want 10th grade end of the year work. Another format is you could write a letter from one character to another, and that's got to be 10 or more lines. You're going to do a picture scavenger hunt. You could choose to do that. You're going to take a picture of 10 items that represent one character or a scene from the reading and explain the significance of each picture. You could research a tropical island if you haven't done that before. Or research any topic. You could research a tropical island, the nature of humankind, the qualities of a good leader, anything that has to do with the reading. You're going to write a 1-page typed double-spaced summary of your findings, making sure that you cite your sources. Another choice is you could create a social media profile of one of the characters, have at least 2 posts with comments, username, pictures. Submissions must be in color. You could complete a Venn diagram comparing and contrasting 2 characters, include at least 30 items in total. You could write a 15 or more line poem, song, or rap that deals with something on the island. You could create a 1-page typed double-spaced diary entry about a character or event in the reading. You could do a song playlist for a character in your book or for a theme in the book, and include 10 or more song titles with the artist and a brief explanation as to why each song would appeal to that character or that theme. You could choose to write a 1-page typed double-spaced literary analysis essay. Essays should explore Golding's use of a theme or a symbol in the novel. And lastly, you can choose your own task if we didn't cover one that you like. And the topics that you could choose from are hope and rescue, fear, priorities, the nature of humankind, civilization versus savagery, leadership qualities, survival, or evil. So again, you choose one role, one audience, one format, one topic, and you combine them to create your raft. And make sure it says here in the directions, read your directions please, to have a heading labeled with the 4 components you have chosen. Don't assume I'm going to know what you're doing. I need to know your role, your audience, your format, and your topic. Must be typed or written in pen unless you're creating a drawing, which must be done in color. Has to be edited. A lot of you turning in virtual work are not editing your work. Be authentic to the character and to address the topics and the themes thoroughly. Okay, so that's your choice assignments. One of those is due for next week. And then lastly, the other thing that's due is your study guide. And so you need to get to me your study guide. And I'm giving you 2 options. And one of them is the honor system in essence, and I would hate to think that anyone would violate my trust, but you can either take a picture of each page of the study guide and upload it to an email to me, which is my preference, or if that's difficult for you, you can have a parent or guardian write a brief note stating that you have finished all pages and questions in the study guide, and make sure that it's excuse me, dated and signed. Take a picture of the note and email and send it to me via email. An email from your parents is not enough because it would be easy for you to access your parents' email and send it to me yourself. If I think that the note is forged, I will call home and double check. So please don't think about forging your parents' note just to get credit for the study guide, okay? I've been doing this for 31 years, so I know all of the tricks in the book. So you have to do one choice assignment from the raft, and you have to get to me your study guide, either through a letter from a parent or guardian that's signed and dated, and you take a picture of it and send it to me, or you take a picture of the study guide itself, each of the pages, and you send it to me through email. Okay, does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, shoot me an email, ask me a question. I'm hoping to hear from you. Remember, last week I only got 7 assignments from one class, 12 assignments from another, and 10 from another. I'm hoping to see those roll in, and then I'm going to post this video, and you've got another week to catch up. But it really makes sense to do English work on Tuesday. It's not going to take you long. So watch my video and then get right started on your homework and turn it in to me. That's the best way to do it, okay? I hope I didn't forget anything. I think I covered all of the bases, and I hope you're doing well, and I'm doing okay. I miss seeing you. I'll be scheduling a period 8 Zoom call this week, Thursday at 1 p.m. So I'll be sending that invitation out tomorrow for period 8 students. Touch base, please. I worry about you. I miss you. I can't wait to see you again. Take care.